It was God who was observing and watching. God seeing this small group of people who had just been through this whole ordeal. God, happy that these faithful folks had built this ark, and now we're ready to come out of it after this difficult season in their life. In this mythical story, God is looking at this circumstance and evaluating it. They say hindsight's 20/20. So God is looking at these folk, Noah and this descendants and all these animals and having to start over. And God is wondering, like many of us wonder, especially after a difficult season. The question became, was this the right thing to do? Was this the right thing to do? For sure, a lot had happened in this narrow season, and in this mythological story. The reality of it was that God was responding to a difficulty in the earth. People were not being faithful. People were angry towards one another. Humanity was at its worst. And out of that crisis moment, God had a decision to make. And now here they found themselves on the other side of a difficult decision. And in this ancient mythical story, God is evaluating like humans would evaluate. One of the beautiful things about the early narratives in Genesis is that the God we encounter there is a God who's so like human beings in so many ways. I mean, we see God chatting it up with human beings. We see God getting angry like humans get angry. We see God also sensing a certain amount of regret. And so in this text for the day, God, it's almost as if you allow me a little poetic license with this mythical story, it is almost as if God is looking at God's self in the mirror and going, all right, I can't do this again. So from now on, no matter the season, the earth and all of creation will continue. In the fall and in the winter, in the springtime and in the summer, those things will never cease from now on. It's not as if things had gotten necessarily better among humanity. In other words, the original problem that this mythical story was struggling with was still there. In fact, not but a few verses after this great promise of God to Noah and Noah's descendants, we see that humanity's back at it in its old games of competition and struggle and violence against one another. Noah himself gets upset and overwhelmed, and we see him getting drunk and exposing himself to his children. So obviously something had not changed in humanity. What had changed in this mythical story was the way that God was going to handle this struggle among humanity. And a promise that God would forever then be a God of creation and recreation. In other words, that God would not be a God of destruction. Unlike some of the other gods that others worshiped in this season when these stories are told, this God that we proclaim loudly each and every week is a God that has a characteristic. This is the God who makes, creates, recreates, redeems, forgives, makes all things new. Not a God of destruction, despair, and hopelessness. Now, for us, smart folks who gather in 2021, this might not seem like a lesson for us to learn, and yet, if you pay attention, think about the messages you hear about God. We still have folks who, when a natural disaster happens, what do they say? Oh, God made it happen. Or when something happens in someone's life that's really bad, well, we still hear folks who say, oh, well, you knew, right, what they had done? That's punishment. God is punishing them. There's still some of us in our own lives, if we grew up in such religious traditions, that still almost feel it in our bones. When we're not doing the right thing or when we make a mistake, we wonder, is God going to punish me? And so in this ancient mythical story, we're told that God was not happy with just reminding God's self of this promise. God speaks to Noah and to Noah's descendants. And you almost can perceive a certain hesitation on Noah's part. You might imagine that to be the case. In this mythical story, Noah just spent, we think, about a year with his closest relatives with a bunch of animals in a closed space. I mean, you would be a little hesitant yourself. So God has to do much more than just say it. God gives them a symbol of that promise in this mythical story. It's an interesting symbol that God gives Noah. And I say it's interesting because to this day in my own life, when I see a rainbow, I go, wow, it's a rainbow. I could be driving around, or I could be coming out of my house, and if I see a rainbow, it's like time stops and I just have to observe it, watch it. It still has this sense of awe and wonder in me to this day. Now, I rationally know, folks, that rainbows, actually, we know what they are. It's this beautiful optical illusion with the light of the sun shining through the raindrops in the sky, creating this beautiful prism of color that we observe. But I can't deny that at that moment, there is awe and wonder at it. It's almost like it doesn't quite belong there. And yet there it is. I still even call my children to watch it. It was really cute when they were little because they would run to the window and go, "Whoa, Dad." But now they're teenagers and they're like, "Oh, Dad, it's just a rainbow." A sign in the sky that millennia later we still stop and observe. These ancients who were telling these mythical stories were too taken by this sign. And so the ancient mythical story says, each time you see this bow in the sky, remember the promise, I am the God who will not destroy. I am the God who will not be about hopelessness, who will not be about deconstruction. I am the God who creates and recreates and makes all things new. And we need that reminder still to this day. For there are forces in the universe who are constantly trying to convince us that somehow God is after us, trying to get us and the universe. And we, as God's people, call First-Plymouth, come and remind them, oh, no, the God we serve is the God who redeems, who forgives, who recreates, who makes all things new. The God that we proclaim is the God that no matter how hopeless the situation seems, there is hope, new life, new possibility, new beginning. Not everything's perfect. And yet, on some of those moments of storm, when all seems lost, we look out our window and there is the promise. Once again, the nature of who this God is right before us. So, people of God, we are the bearers of this reality for people around us. We looking out the window and pointing towards those little signs all around us of this God who makes all things new, who creates and recreates. And yes, sometimes it is the awe and wonder of a rainbow, but sometimes this hopeful expectation comes to us in different ways. This morning, it came to us by little children singing a hymn and leading us in it. And I was watching the congregation, and in the moment, at 9 o'clock, we're still a little sleepy. We just are. But then the kids began to sing, and the smiles came to everyone's faces. And just after that kind of sleepiness of morning, we all woke up a little, paying attention to the melody of children. Sometimes it's the changing leaves during fall time, or the cool breeze, that first cool breeze that we feel in late August. Sometimes it's by seeing someone we haven't seen in a while. Little glimpses of new creation, hope sneaking in when we least expect it. God whispering, remember, I am not the God of destruction and despair. I am the God of new life, new beginning, the one who redeems all things, the God of resurrection. And all of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus hear that word whispered in our ears, and we smile, and we nod, and no matter the storm, we remember God will redeem this too, because that's who this God is. A sign in the sky about a God who's still creating and recreating. Can you perceive it?